please welcome back the incredible Ashleigh Di Lello.
I'm so excited to be here in person.
I know. You know,
Much better than Zoom.
Oh, yeah. And you know how sometimes you're like with your girlfriend, you're like, let's plan a trip to Mexico. It never happens.
Yep.
Well, this is our trip to Mexico.
We did it.
It's here.
We're like, let's do part 2 in person. Look, we actually did it.
When we were chatting on the recording, we talked about, let's do a part 2 because we kind of went on tangents with things. Yeah. And then you're like, I'm actually going to be in Kelowna. I'm like, what? This is weird. Why are you coming to Kelowna from Utah? And you're speaking at an event.
Yeah. So it worked out.
With some of the ladies from the crowd.
I know.
That's crazy.
Awesome.
So the other cool thing about this, not only part 2 in person, but we have a little studio audience today.
Oh, it's so fun.
And I think pretty much everybody said yes. It was like a handful of people that I wanted here, not even knowing that half of you were speaking on the same stage as her. These are just like some of the pretty brilliant faces of our town.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm like coming into your girlfriend trip to Mexico.
Yeah, pretty much. Except you're going to have to dye your hair blonde.
Yeah, just the brunette hair.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to go a little bit deeper on the tech side of what it is that you do. Because last time was like, I don't want to say surface level, but it was like, let's just get a little like the Webster dictionary definition of what it is that you do. And I know I asked this on the last one, but you got to tell us, what is biomechanical healing?
Emotional healing. No worries.
Okay, I mean, that was ChatGPT. It corrected me.
Did it?
Yeah, it's like, it's not emotional, but it's bio-emotional healing. Okay.
Well, that's my process. So ChatGPT doesn't know it yet, I guess. Needs
Probably
to go to
not.
Google. Doesn't know everything. Now we know. Now we know. Thinks it's so smart. Bioemotional healing in the simplest way is a process based in neuroscience, but also taking into account the body that works cohesively together to essentially rewire the nervous system out of the stress cycle it's gotten stuck into, right? My initial drive was to rewire pain because my nervous system got stuck in chronic pain. But alongside that was a lot of trauma, a lot of PTSD around my body and my health from having almost died for 4 years and then losing the capacity to walk and living in widespread nerve pain. So that was my initial drive, was how do I rewire my pain pathways? How do I get my nervous system out of this? And then in all my studies, I realized it's really the same for each of us. It just manifests in different ways based on our life experiences, based on our biodiversity, our personality. All of those come into play in how our stress responses manifest. But really the root cause driving a lot of our mental and physical health is this overly sensitized nervous system that's been altered by, yes, maybe 1 or 2 significant events, but really taking into account all of our life and how it shapes us. And I have seen that's why so many people can't get well or can't get fully free, even if they're doing everything under the sun, nutrition, supplements, movement, all the biohacking that exists, all the modalities, but why can't I fully get to where I want to go? Yeah. And it really is this nervous system that's operating independently because it can, based on your whole data bank of history and what it thinks it needs to do to protect you, which is always comes out in alarm signals. That's how it gets our attention. But it feels more like punishment. But that's essentially what it is. So I work with clients on all spectrums of physical and mental health and trauma or just feeling stuck in their life. Why can't I move past this barrier? Why can't I let this thing go? That happened to me 20 years ago. Yeah. But the nervous system's the key.
Okay, so let's talk about letting things go.
Yeah.
This morning, maybe, when I was getting ready, I keep thinking about a couple women in my life that never did anything malicious, but for some reason didn't want anything to do with me anymore. And I reflect back on these stories and these moments in my life with them. Like I said, they didn't do anything wrong, but they just changed their opinion of wanting to be a friend with me. I get caught in that, and it actually stops me from getting close to people because I don't want to experience that pain again because it's like grief.
Yeah.
Do you work with people about stuff like that? Like letting go of,
Absolutely.
how do you I'm like, I'm good, I'm fine. I want them to be happy and successful. And then I'm like, why am I like ruminating on this and this person? And it just keeps coming up.
Well, part of why the rumination keeps happening is the brain is a predicting machine. So the brain wants to predict why, not only predict the future, but why things happened. So when you have a situation like that where you don't really have the answers and it's not clear, just from the brain mechanism, that's one reason why it ruminates, because it's trying to come up with the why so that it feels like it has something to close around, right? So you have that, which is how the brain works. But then you also have that it hurt, right?
Yeah.
It hurt. And of course, with that hurt comes different thoughts of what did I do or what's wrong or all those things that naturally occur, right? When friendships end or someone hurts us or relationships end. Again, the brain's trying to find meaning. So the easiest is then to look at ourselves, right? Because we can't go inside their brain. So our brain's like, what did I do? What's wrong with me? Mm-hmm. And then it can't land on something specific, right? So it keeps trying to find.
Yeah.
So that's when we ruminate and it just keeps coming up. And then the other part of the brain is past pain always predicts future protection, right? So your brain, because that's hurtful, right? Everything that hurts us, alters us. The brain takes a snapshot and embosses that neurologically to hold on to it to protect you from the same thing or something similar happening again.
That's so crazy.
Right?
When we just did a month-long trip and I journal every morning, and it could be 2 sentences, it could be 3 pages. It just depends on my mood. So there was a month gap, and my last journal entry was the early December, and we just got back like a week ago. So when I went to journal, I was like, oh, I'm going to go look back at what I wrote. And it was just lists upon lists of all the things that I thought could go wrong on this trip. I was like, oh, plane delayed, we're going to lose our luggage. So if we're going to lose our luggage, then I have to do this. So we talk about like packing our carry-on was pretty much half the stuff.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Just in case.
Yeah, just in case, because we don't have any money to buy anything else. And like all these things, like photocopies of our passports. And so when I went back and I reflected on it, nothing happened. Not one single thing happened. It was kind of liberating too, but we hold on to these things because yes, I lost luggage once.
Right.
And it was lost for 2 hours. And it was so dramatic for me. Yeah.
Well, and that's the crazy thing too to understand about the brain, unfortunately, but at least it helps us understand. The brain has a one trial learning for negativity. So in that instance, you lost your luggage one time out of how many trips?
Hundreds.
Right?
Hundreds.
But because that was emotional enough, worrisome enough, the brain now in that one experience kind of eradicated all the other hundreds of seamless experiences your baggage gets there. And it then connects traveling to this one experience, which then predicts, okay, just so that now you're not taken off guard, let's expect that it's going to happen. So then you plan and prepare, because it wasn't just losing your luggage. It was you weren't prepared. You didn't plan on it. So it took you off guard, right? Because you just expect your luggage to come out. And so all of those pieces, again, one trial learning informed the brain. Traveling now means potential losing of my luggage. So
crazy.
I've got to prepare, because even if it does happen, at least now I'm prepared.
So in these moments of thinking that it could happen, physically, I could be going through the same trauma as though it had really happened. So my body is succumbed to that trauma.
Yep. And that's, in part, it's easier if you've already gone through it, right? Because that's a memory, again, that the brain holds on to and can activate. It's a neural pathway. That's what all of our memories and experience is. We have a cellular memory, especially the hurtful ones, right? The joyous ones, we don't hold on to as much because the brain doesn't have to protect us from that. The things that hurt us, harmed us, changed our life, weren't fun, were traumatic, or whatever strong emotion. It's just a strong emotion. The brain says, I need to hold on to this because that impacted me emotionally. So I need to prepare and protect from that happening again, which is why going back to what you said with friendships, the brain, and this is all happening subconsciously, right? Which is why it can be so tricky, because you want new friendships, like, and clearly you have great friendships and you want to open yourself up to that, as all humans do. But when that happens, the brain subconsciously is going, but remember how painful that was? And we never really got answers. We don't really have closure. So I would like to protect you, Renee, from going through that again. So I'll just build up walls, because the vulnerability of getting hurt matters more to me than the connection of now,
crazy.
right?
Yeah.
So even though the thing we're seeking, like, I want connection, but those protective walls block us from being able to fully open ourselves up to protection because of that memory that when that hurt happened, right?
That's so crazy. And it wasn't even that bad. So I can imagine, okay. Any questions, ladies?
Yeah.
Oh, I can totally relate, right? I went through a period last year, actually 2 years, when my dad passed away suddenly, and then I almost lost my marriage. And now it's like I'm in such a hyper and anxious. I've never experienced anything like it, and I'm working through it. But those triggers are so intense, and you feel like you're going through that event over and over and over. And I have this pain in here. I just can't release. Like
Yeah, we need to get rid of that.
Yeah, because bending over, I've so stiff, and I'm doing the yoga and I'm hiking and doing the stretches, pigeon pose, all that jazz. Nothing is helping because I know I'm holding on to that trauma. Yeah, so I need the help.
Yeah, good. Well, this is what I do, but just to give, I mean, obviously the reason why it's been so hard is, obviously, I don't know how your father died. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he heart attack
Okay,
at
so
the home, so we found him.
So so totally unexpected.
Yeah.
Not prepared.
No.
And I've worked with a lot of grief and a lot of loss of family members, children, spouses, parents, because it's so impactful. And as hard as it is for someone to go through like a prolonged, slow death, there's preparation for the nervous system. Like, not just us as souls, but for the nervous system. And so that preparation, even though it's harder in other ways, right, to watch people you love die, it's easier for the nervous system to process it. Those situations like that are so traumatic, so unexpected, no preparation, they're incredibly altering. It can alter the nervous system in that moment, because it's one of the most meaningful relationships to you. So it matters so much. And that complete lack of knowing what was coming tells the nervous system, hey, I need to be on guard. I need to be hypervigilant now. I need to constantly be aware of what could go wrong, right? And now I'm going to start catastrophizing more. So now I'm going to start having this more negative worry thought loop, which is why some people are like, why? I used to feel like I was so positive, and now I'm constantly saying the what ifs, right, where I used to not. And that's, again, the brain is saying, that was so hard, that was so unexpected. Let's just operate now in preparation of horrible things happening, because now we'll be prepared for when they do. And then if you go, then you add to that what you went through with your marriage, just heightens it to a whole new level. And then when it's impactful enough like that, the brain says, how do I get your attention all the time? Oh, I'm going to send some pain, because that's going to not let you forget. That's going to have your attention all the time. I'm just going to scream because I have felt so unsafe because I lost my father. And then obviously a change in a marriage, which is, again, so meaningful, would alter everything. And then you start what ifs with children and all of that. What does that look like in the future? And the brain can't latch on to anything of that. So it starts sending pain signals, right, to manifest how much has been altered, right? But then now you feel extra punished, right? You're like, I've gone through this, and now I'm going through this, and it's just once those internal alarm bells start going, I don't feel safe because look at what's happened in life. I didn't plan or prepare for that. Once they keep signaling like I'm in danger, and because the brain perceives physical and emotional danger like almost exact, there's no separation, it just keeps running them. And then when you're also in pain, you start having hypervigilance around your body and movement, which then just amplifies all of those alarm signals, and it gets stuck in this cycle, which feels really frustrating because even though grief is with you your whole life, because there will always be moments where you're like, I wish my dad was here, right? Or here for my children. Like that's not something that ever goes away, but your capacity to start to have a greater ability to process it that allows the grief to not be so heavy and allows the brain to start saying, okay, that was then and this is now, because part of what holds it so present is the emotional brain doesn't have a time clock. So it's constantly cross-referencing those moments where you found your dad in real time, like as if it's happening today. And that's where it feels like no matter how much I cry, no matter how much I think I'm letting go of this, it feels visceral, like it's just happening. So that's part of what you also have to do as well as you move through the process is allow your brain to separate. That was horrible, but that was then, and this is now.
Yeah. I feel like I went numb for about a year. I couldn't feel, and now I feel like it's all coming out. And I'm just like, it's like purging. The last 2 months, I mean, the anxiety, I was in like a whole week at home. I couldn't do social events. I was like, I canceled everything because I was in so much pain, and I like my heart palpitation, all this stuff. I'm like, what the heck? It's been, so much time. But I think because I went numb, and then because, I lost 2 men in my life, my dad and then my husband, we're back, we're working, but it was like, boom. And then I had the children, my mom, and all that kind of stuff. Like, I had to survive. But now, things are kind of okay. I'm like, but now it's like, boom, here's your anxiety. Boom, here's your pain. Like you can't do anything. I'm like, yay. Like, what? Like, help me.
Well, I'll give, that's a good sign in terms of your nervous system feels safe enough to start bringing it up, even though it doesn't feel good in any way, shape, or form. And usually almost all of us, when it goes through something so life-altering, we just go into survival patterns. And that serves us for a time because you had your kids, you have to keep showing up for life. And then it doesn't serve us, right? And then it starts to really come up because your system's like, we've got to deal with this now. And it doesn't feel good, but it's a good sign that it feels safe enough to, right? Because it will stay in those survival patterns of numbness, right? Until it's like, I've got to start to process this. And that's how it's trying to get us to, so it doesn't get worse, right? The pain doesn't get worse, or illness or something else comes because of the stress that we're holding. So one tool that is really, really effective, and this is for everybody that is listening or going through something that they feel like they can't let go, is everyone hears about writing, right? Writing is really important, but there's a particular way to do it that literally looking at 200 different neuroscience studies all point to that. One of the things that's hard when processing or letting go is we'll do it, but then we won't revisit it again for maybe like a month or a couple weeks. And what happens then is the brain just essentially is processing the same level, right? Because it's had enough time to not go deeper. So writing, first and foremost, why it's so important is it slows the brain down. So we can even talk about it or go to therapy or anything, but because the brain works so fast and can ping pong from here to here to here there, it really doesn't process. It's just kind of ruminating on this same level. When you write, and the studies show typing or handwriting work both the same effectiveness, you cause the brain to slow down because while you're executing this or this, the brain has to slow down to create space. And in that space is where some of those deeper subconscious thoughts can come out that really don't when we're just talking or thinking, right? So writing, and set a timer, 15 to 30 minutes, and just offload whatever you're feeling, what is coming up, hold nothing back, because this is writing you won't keep. And this is where it's different, right? With traditional journal writing, I don't care who you are, we all hold back a little bit if we think someone's going to read it one day.
Sometimes I write a journal, I'm like, I hope he sees it.
So there are certain instances where you're like, oops, leave that out, you know? But to a certain degree, sometimes if we are like, I'm not going to keep this, it's kind of scary what we feel liberated to express, right? And this isn't who we are. It's just how life has impacted us. But if you do it with the intention of getting rid of it, everything to the brain comes down to meaning. If the brain knows, I'm not going to keep this, hold on to this, there's this liberation of being able to be more bluntly honest, right? Even, I always tell my clients, like, be ugly, be like, say things that almost shock you because we wouldn't even necessarily say them to another person, right? Because they just feel so vulnerable and scary sometimes, right?
So there's a thing I did with my spiritual therapist. So first of all, Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way has been one of the best therapies I've ever done. I highly recommend you do that. You're essentially writing 3 pages of conscious stream of thought in the morning. But one thing I did was like a forest bathing, where you essentially just go walk in the forest, you wander no direction, and you bring a little basket with you, and you collect items that somehow have some sort of significance to you. It stands out. You're like a branch, a leaf, a flower. And then you sit with them and you meditate and you look at these things, and maybe you're like, oh, this leaf here actually reminds me of my father. And you stand on a perch and you literally just throw them and you release them. And it's supposed to be the start of you releasing that grief or that pain or the thing that your body's holding on to. And I did that, and it's a process. So it doesn't just go away. It's like, gone. Yeah. But what a relief, because sometimes you don't even know what's in that basket. It's like the basket of burden. It's in there, and you're like, I didn't know this person had this pull on me. Boom. But the journaling is huge.
Well, and with that, the last caveat to that is you've got to do it 4 times consecutively. So on the same thing, okay? So, and you want to keep bringing your brain back to it. Other things will come up, but it can feel repetitive, right? But remember, how many times has your brain gone over these same things? So you have to do it consecutively, and at most you can spread it out to once a week for 4 weeks. But usually I do it more condensed because that consecutiveness allows the brain to start to work through some of the more layers versus, well, I'll come back to this again. And then it's just kind of right here. And it's really amazing to see how what you write starts to shift as you do it consecutively. So that's really key, because obviously, like, writing every day is so great and so effective, but this is a very applicable, like, this one thing, you're going to just focus in on losing your dad and the experience and how it felt and the loss, and you just do it 4 consecutive times. Now, that's what most of the studies point to as most effective. But I tell my clients, listen to your soul, right? If you've done 4 and you're like, I feel like I need another one, then do that, right? We always take the human into consideration, but it's that consecutive writing that really starts to move through those layers most effectively. And I love that because it's a tool we all have, right?
It scares me to think, like, oh no, I got to go that deep. Because what am I going to find down there?
Well, and that's what most people don't, right? And I think the fear is inherent to the idea that we've all felt this and we've all heard it. Like, I'm afraid if I go there, I'll get stuck there, right? And that's one reason why the brain doesn't process. So again, the brain, everything comes down to meaning. If we have a threat around feeling, going to what, like, the depths of how something has hurt us, the brain won't let us. That's another reason why we can't let go, because we don't ever allow the full sitting in of what it's done to us. And part of that is how we've spoken about it. So the brain says, oh, let's not do that. So the brain will put up walls that allow us to process, but it's the thing we want to process, right? So I tell my clients, you have to first change that meaning with your brain and say, no, I'm not, this isn't to get stuck there. I'm actually already stuck there. I feel it every day. It comes out in my stress responses. It's showing up in pain. I feel it in my relationships. Like I watch a movie with a father-daughter and I get emotional, right? Like, so I tell them, you're already stuck there. This is to let it go. And if you can start telling your brain, this is why I'm doing it. You don't need to protect me from it. It's not going to feel great. I understand. But the only way to the other side is through. But this is safe because this is to actually let it go, not get further stuck there. And when you give it that meaning, the brain starts to have more allowance and also more safety with it, right? So I tell my clients, it's not pleasant, but it is empowering because you're moving through it and facing it versus facing it but kind of suppressing it and having it stay with you all day, every day.
So we're avoiding it, which this leads into my next question. How do you identify subtle everyday triggers? And does the age of a trigger affect how easily it can be rewired?
So let's reverse answer that. One thing that I know and I've seen is I never put limits on how quickly the brain will change something. And sometimes it can take longer depending on how long it's been there and the depth and how much work has been done and how safe the brain feels ready to let it go, right? So there's so many things that contribute to the brain has to feel safe that you're okay to let that go. So there, it's always a little bit different, right? But I've also seen enough work to where the brain's like, okay, I'm done with this now. And like, it's like, okay.
It's so crazy.
I'm good.
I've
right?
seen friends that were alcoholics wake up one day and be sober
done.
completely and like not even go back and think. I go, what pill did you take?
Right?
Like, what did you do?
I know. And some is personality that helps, right? That comes into play. Some of it is how many things in your life have altered you, right? So that's more, if the more traumatic experiences you've gone through, the more life-altering, the more hurtful, the more things you felt like you had no control or power in, that's when the brain takes a little bit longer because it's like, it's not just that. What about this? And what about this? And remember this? You know, it's like you're having this. That's what my brain did with everything that I lost and everything that I went through twice and the fear every day of not living. And it was like this internal dialogue where my brain's like, we're not safe. Don't you remember this? And don't you remember this? And it's going through this history, right? So that is where it can be longer than maybe someone who's had experiences and they had an addiction, but they don't have this long neural memory of helplessness, powerlessness, life changing instantaneously. And so their system's better able to then make a decision and switch, right? So it really, it's like my husband once said to me as I was studying this all and going over him, he's like, you've had a lot. So it makes sense that your brain's like, I'm not letting go of this hypervigilance, right? Like even when I was really healthy and in my professional dance career, I had injury after injury after injury that this was life-altering injury. And the day before, opening on Broadway, I tear my shoulder and then I tear my knee in the West End in London. And then I get hurt the semifinals on So You Think You Can Dance during the live taping and they won't let me dance. Like, so it wasn't just the huge traumatic, it was just all these memories that made it harder for my brain to say, oh, I'm actually safe and I can trust my body now. So that goes into play as well, depending on the whole history.
Okay. Now I get why I can't drive a moped. So I am obsessed with this whole thing about mopeds right now. I told myself before getting on one that I don't have balance.
Okay.
So that means I'm going to fall.
Yep.
And why I told the story was because I broke my collarbone, I broke my ankle, I broke my elbow. I've cut my eye wide open because I would just fall. This is when I was younger. It hasn't happened in like 20 years. So I'm like, even get on a bike. I'm like, oh, I don't have any balance.
Yeah.
And I will be on the moped going the steady speed where you don't have to go like this, to keep balance. And I'm like all the way down the highway.
So you've just got to redefine that meaning.
Totally.
Right? So, and you can even say, well, I didn't have balance as a kid, but I do now because you are an adult, right? You're more into your body. You work out. You're strong. Yeah. Add in some good mobility training, balance training, like add that into your training, get on a BOSU ball, which then further validates I, in fact, do have balance, like balance on one leg, right? Try closing your eyes. That's really hard. Really is. Here all of a sudden, like, wait, what happened? I actually don't have balance. No, but that's part of that where, you know what? Yeah, as a kid, that's what my experience gave birth to this belief, right? And the brain was validated in it based on what you just named off. And that's the thing is our beliefs come from experience that are valid, right? I don't have balance. See, here and here and here and here. Versus, yep, that was the case when I was younger. But now I'm in my body, I'm an adult, I'm strong, and I'm training, and I'm stable, and I'm even becoming more stable. And that's part of that separation, but also the intentional communication of where you are now versus where you were. And now we have to extract that new belief system and then give your brain evidence of it, right? So now I've got to intentionally, when you're at the gym, just like, look, I was really balanced, right?
Yeah, I got to think of those moments.
Think of those moments because the brain needs evidence to create a new belief because it goes in contrast to the evidence of the past. And it doesn't have to be huge, micro evidences. It's just the intention of pointing them out to your brain.
So those would be, okay, coming back to my question, the subtle everyday triggers for me. I don't have balance. That's what I keep telling myself.
Right. So you learned that by paying attention, right? Huh. It's a funny thing that we don't really pay attention to what we think or repeatedly say because it's habitual, right? So it just kind of sits in our head and like, oh, this is who I am. This is what I think. And we speak things even that we don't really pay attention to because we've spoken them hundreds of times, thousands of times, maybe some of them since childhood. So it takes that conscious effort to actually really start to pay attention to both what we say, right, and what's just happening in our head when we're getting ready in the morning or just really starting to be aware of our internal environment because most of us don't really listen to that. It's just, we've heard it so many times. Yeah. It's just who we are. So it just runs almost unconsciously, right? Because that's our operating system. It's like when we drive somewhere and we're like, oh, I don't really remember driving here, but I know I did.
Every day.
Right?
My kids.
Because it just takes over, right? And we're there, but we're not really there.
It's kind of dangerous.
It is. Yeah. I know. Sorry for that example.
That's a great example.
But we've all been there, you know?
It goes the other way as well, because all of a sudden somebody will say something to you that you never thought about or noticed as you drove past it every single day. And all of a sudden those words, you see it everywhere or you don't miss it.
There's a theory. It's like that's it. The RAS. Yes. Yeah. So it's like you want to go buy a Honda and you don't see Hondas until you buy one. All of a sudden they're everywhere. That's all you. Yeah.
So part of it is the protective mechanism of the brain. So our brain has to filter information. If you think of how much information comes in every day, but especially today with our phones, the brain has to protect itself from being overloaded. So the reticular activating system, which is the network of neurons at the brainstem, protects the brain by only letting information in that is pertinent to you or that aligns with what you believe, right? So now that car is pertinent to you, whereas before it wasn't. So now your brain notices it. Right? So it does that in the simplest way, right? Like a car or a building you didn't notice before. Like in a funny way, my dad was a dentist and he'd always point out people's teeth in movies. And I'd be like, Dad, you're ruining the movie for me. And now I'd be like noticing teeth, you know? And I'm like,
all you see is teeth.
All you see is teeth. And and like the bad bridge, you know, and I'm like, Dad, stop, right? Because now my brain was looking for teeth, where before I was not paying attention to teeth, right? So it's just also that shaped by what we repeatedly hear, right? Or what other people talk about. So you have that on just that like basic level of what you're exposed to. But then the deeper part of the reticular activating system is it really only lets in information that aligns with what you believe. So that's where if I have
Like
a
confirmation
belief,
bias.
the confirmation bias, absolutely. So if I deep inside have a belief like that people don't really like me, my brain will find evidence throughout the day. Like someone could be in their own world, they'd had a hard morning, and just the way that they're looking and they're, you know, at the coffee shop in line with you, they're like, what are they thinking about me? Are they judging me? Right? When they're thinking about the argument they had with their spouse, right? But your brain is got to validate the beliefs that you have because that's its wiring. It's wired to validate beliefs, and it does that automatically through the reticular activating system. And that's where important part of starting to pay attention is to figure out what our beliefs are. And beliefs are just things we repeatedly say or think that then starts to form a belief, or a belief comes from huge events that the brain has to extract a meaning of. So it creates a belief system to have a meaning of why, right? And that's where, until we start to really evaluate them and then start to proactively change them, the brain will hold us in alignment with them because that's how it's wired to make sense of who we are and how we interact with the world.
Oh, yeah. I see this in people that have gone from like just doing the same thing in terms of going to the gym. There's no difference. Businesses, they've always stayed at the same level. Marriage has always been mediocre. Something had to change. And it was that.
Yep.
It's that in the internal work, that belief of that's not who I am. Like I've always been told, oh, you're tall, so it's going to be really hard for you to gain muscle. So guess what? I don't gain muscle because that must be the truth.
Right.
So it's kind of like my scapegoat essentially and not working out so hard. But it turns out that a 6-foot-tall woman can be very, very strong.
Yeah. Everyone can be.
I just got to work a little harder, a little more protein.
And it doesn't mean that
Protein is key.
right, protein is key. And it doesn't mean that someone might have a body type that puts on muscle easier,
Totally.
right? We have genetics, but I want to share a study that shows that what we believe and expect is way more powerful than genetics, actually, right?
Joe Dispenza does a lot of this work.
Yeah. And what I love is like we've got more and more studies that show it, like it's evidence. I mean, throughout history, placebo effect with medicine has always shown belief.
You can gain muscle just
by
thinking,
thinking about it. Absolutely.
Like doing butt.
Yeah, they have. They've done studies with biceps, particularly.
And
right?
glutes, though.
Yeah, but it's just
No implants.
Just start squeezing.
After this interview, you should look at my butt.
I'm thinking about it. Like,
It's growing.
I'm like looking under here. Like, let me see here now. I didn't notice. Now I will. I will notice your butt. I'm going to look for it. But yes, our body will always stay in alignment with what we believe is possible, right? That's just it. And our intelligence also, because the brain will put up walls because that's not who we say we are. And the brain is wired to validate our identity, right? So these are all these things that we say we are or we're not. Again, that's how the brain makes meaning and can predict, right, of who we are, and that feels safe. If at least I know who I am or what I'm not, that's like safe because I know what that looks like, right? So it's really changing that. And I'm going to share this study, but this is one thing at least I was aware of, and I'm glad with my daughter because she was super as a baby, like hi to everybody, and then her brain went to stranger danger, like overdrive, and now bless the old lady at Costco who smiles at her and she's like wailing from fear, right? I know. It was like, it's not you. Just stranger. Her brain had gone a little too far, right? And so the evolution of that is she started to be a little more timid around people, right? So people, and I didn't mean this viciously, it's just what we do as humans is observe and report. So, they observed she seemed shy. So what would they do? They would report. Oh, are you shy? Right? To her. in front of her. And again, it's not malicious. It's just observing and reporting, right? So they're like, oh, you're so shy. And knowing, thankfully, I'm glad, because otherwise I don't think I would have handled it in the way I did now. Like, oh, that's really just not a big deal, right? Yeah, she is shy. Versus understanding, we're telling her who she is and we're shaping her brain for the future. So I was always very intentional of saying, no, she's not shy. She just is getting to know you, right? She's just learning who you are and getting to know you. Like, she's not shy. And then we'd leave and I'd say, Sophia, are you shy around me? No. Are you shy around your friends? No. Are you shy around your teachers? No. And I'm like, see, you're not shy. You just aren't the same with people you don't know immediately that you are with people you do, you know? And I just kept trying to hone in because people would say it to her all the time. And that was so important in shaping her brain, to which now you would never say she was shy in any way, shape, or form. In fact, people now comment the opposite of, wow, you're such a well-spoken conversation, like 10-year-old with adults. But the problem is we don't understand how powerful that programming is, because if I hadn't been aware, and I'm grateful I went through what I did, because I know otherwise I just wouldn't have understood how powerful that was to shape her. She heard it enough. Her brain had evidence of her shyness. She would have grown up, I'm shy.
Yeah.
I'm shy. And then as she grew up, her brain says, I can't do that, I'm shy. I can't say that, I'm shy. Right? And that would hold her in that box versus putting a very important differentiation. You're not shy. You're just not as open with strangers as you are to people you know. That now says, oh, I'm actually not shy. I just might take a minute to open up, right? And be myself.
So this is triggering me in the story as a kid. So the house I grew up in had like a staircase where there was like a landing. And my sister and I wouldn't go to bed. We'd sit on the landing and listen to my parents talk. They couldn't see us. And I remember one night, this is when they used to smoke in the house back in the 80s. And I remember, so I had a great childhood. So actually the smell of cigarette smoke is great. It's like a good memory trigger. But anyways, this conversation, and they were talking, and I remember my mom turning to my dad. I don't know how old I was, but enough to remember this. And they were talking about soccer. And they said, you know what? Renee is not that great of a soccer player. I'm like, okay. But she's the kind of a teammate you want on the field because she's always happy and cheering you on. And I was like, all right. So then I thought I'm not a good soccer player. It's like, it's disheartening, but at the same time, that's great because I'm a good cheerleader.
Right.
So my cheerleading skills went through the roof, and then my soccer skills went backwards completely. And to this day, like, don't get me to play soccer. No.
Well, and see, that's crazy. One experience, hearing one thing can then alter the brain. And that's where people often misunderstand the impact of words depending on how it's received, right? Because yes, there's clear, huge traumatic experiences, events, but also someone's brain can be traumatized, meaning changed in a moment of hearing something that now changes their beliefs about themselves, right? To where I'm not a good soccer player, to where I'm not smart, right?
That happened too.
And then now we start saying that, and as kids, and same for me, we're not told that something we think doesn't mean it's true. But we were not really told that, right? Like, hey, you're going to think a lot of stuff, and you don't have to just say, oh, it's true because I thought it, right? But like that's just like basic 101, but no one really explained that growing up, right? Like, you're going to have lots of awful thoughts, like I'm not liked, or I'm dumb, or I'm not good enough, or nobody likes me, or that my coach said this to me, so I must be this. But because it comes up in our own mind, we're like, well, I told myself that, so it must be true. Or it's someone we respect or love, like our parents or a coach, right? So then we adopt it, and then the brain holds us to it, right?
So I'm a crappy soccer player.
Yeah.
That's all right. And I had a good friend, even not that long ago, because we were going on I would say like 5 years ago. These are just like little triggers. I forgot to pack my underwear for a week. And we're going to a cottage. So it was like really inconvenient wearing your bathing suit whatever. It worked out. And they said to me, you're so unorganized. And I'm like, No, I'm not. I look at how I packed for my kids, and I'm like, everything was beautifully laid out. And I had a packing list on my phone. The epitome of being organized. And that just
Right.
because I had faith in this person, I trusted that person, I love that person. That was one thing they said. And I'm getting over it because I've had so much other evidence of it not being the truth. Now I overpack. Now I have like 18 suitcases. One is just underwear. I'm so prepared. But it's crazy, those little things. Like, but you can think about other things that were said in passing too.
Yeah.
That could have been just as triggering, but they're just kind of,
Right.
they bounce off. You're like, oh, that's not a big of a deal.
And there's different things that go into play with that, right? There's the person who said it and how much they matter to you, right? How much you love them or respect them, look up to them, right? And then there's what they said matters so much to you in terms of who you are, right? So that then amplifies, right? If what they say is really significant to you, then it's going to impact you more, right? So some people can say things and you're like, whatever, I don't really care about that. Like, yep. Like if someone told me I was a bad soccer player, I'd be like, yep, cool. Like I'm done now, right? But if they tap on something that matters more to me or I've attached my identity more to, then it hurts me more. And then the third part of that, which is hard to admit, is people also hurt us to the depth of which there's parts of us that already believe it.
Yeah.
So the more we know who we are, right? And obviously I can speak to that more now as an adult than as a child when you're figuring out who you are. But if you know who you are and someone says something to you that you know is absolutely not in truth or alignment, then you can be like, that's great, that's yours, right? But if you have some weakness around something or doubt, or you're still looking for someone else to solidify that in you, then you're way more vulnerable to them saying something that you now start to
It's so crazy.
adopt.
Because I never would have known that vulnerability around being unorganized.
Yeah.
And I think when I reflect back on it, being organized was what was it championed over intelligence, because throughout grade school, I was told I'm not very smart, but I can be organized. And I did. I was always organized. So like, it's almost like somebody was doubting my intelligence.
Yep.
When I look back.
Yeah, and your brain connects those together.
Yeah.
Right? And again, it happens unconsciously.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why in that moment, that's where it's good to sit with. That's where I'm saying like, well, why did that impact me so much?
Yeah.
Like why? And what is my brain connecting that to? Usually in the past, right? What in the past is that connected to that is making it feel so triggering, which on the surface is like stupid, right? That's how we feel. It's how we talk to ourselves. Like, why is this bugging me so much? Like, it's not a big deal, because what is triggering for us is not consciously logical or rational. It's always emotional. And when something in the past has impacted us emotionally enough, the emotional brain will always override the conscious brain.
I get it.
Always.
I totally get this now.
Right? Sometimes people are like, oh, why are you being so illogical? And it's like, it's not literally just you. It's that your blood flows reverted to the emotional brain, and that will trump until we heal and process and make connections. That's why it will always be stronger. And then you're like, what's wrong with me? And we start shaming and guilting ourselves, and then that amplifies the brain, and then it gets further solidified, and we go around and around.
Yeah, we spiral. I get it. It's like I was already telling myself that I was dumb for forgetting my underwear.
Well, yeah, and we do that. I've done that lots of times. You're so dumb, Ashleigh. Yeah. Right? And I'm trying to be mindful of that because of my daughter, right? Because I don't mean that hurtful, but at certain times in my life, I have, right? And because you have to think, this is another thing we do as humans. Like, why are we so hard on ourselves? Well, when things happen, again, the brain has to have some meaning, and it has to have an outlet, and it has to have something to point to. And when you're also like a good person and you're trying to not have vitriol towards others and be a blamer, your brain's like, I know where to go. right here. So I'm dumb. I'm stupid. What's wrong with me? Because then at least there's something to attach to.
blame.
So sometimes, the most, and this is why we're like, why am I so different with everybody else? Like the most maybe like kind and loving and forgiving and graceful are the hardest, harshest to themselves, because like that's the outlet to attach your emotions to.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Right. And that's where that writing can start to help you offload that so that it's not all held
I got to do that.
in here. And 4 consecutive times minimum on something that has kept coming up.
I got a list of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm writing all that.
There has to be a final to it. And that other
The end of the
part-
book will
that
be the
other
end of the
part-
journal will be the final.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah. My question is, it's a 2-part question. First, how can we create more awareness to those subconscious patterns that are showing up for us? And second, how can we create more safety for the brain and the body to be able to go to those places that we have such fear of?
Oh, that's so good.
Great question. I'm going to answer it here, but we'll link it. No. This is so good. I have a brain body blueprint that's totally free that actually goes through those 2 things. We'll link it on here. The first is it really takes conscious awareness, as if you're constantly trying to listen to yourself. And we're really good at knowing our reactions, right? Like, oh, I feel anxious all of a sudden, or oh, I'm in pain, or oh, I've got a headache, or like, oh, I'm mad. But not good at creating time to go, why? Well, what happened? What did that remind me of? Is this really about them, or is this remind me of someone else that's hurt me in the past? Because usually we're like, I don't have time, right? Like we don't have time for ourselves. And I'm speaking from my own no time until my body was like, well, I'll just start screaming so loud. You have no choice, right? And that's kind of what happens is it talks more and more and more, and then it starts screaming until our system's like, we've got to work through this, right? So when you start listening and really consciously paying attention to those moments of, why is my brain racing, right? Oh, why do I have a stomach ache right now? And let me just sit and like ask questions. Like that's some of the best, is to ask ourselves questions, because then our subconscious actually is really good at answering. But we usually ask fearful questions. Well, what's the worst case that could happen? What could go wrong? And, what is wrong with me? So then the brain's like, I'll tell you what's wrong with you, right? Versus, hey, what's going on?
Problem to solve.
Right? Yeah. So when we ask questions, our subconscious answers is just usually we don't ask curious questions. We don't ask questions to learn and to understand. We ask questions to more tear down and like, I don't have time for you. Why are you doing this? And it's like, well, I'll answer you there too. So it's seeking to understand, being conscious, and then being curious versus judgmental, right? Let me just sit and ask from a compassionate place versus I don't have time for you, get in gear like place, right? And it does take a lot of conscious effort at first, to a point where it feels just like a little like, man, I'm kind of tired of listening to myself. But we go through that process before we start feeling more free of it, right? And so that is also part of building trust. You asked that. A lot of us, our nervous system, our brain, our body don't actually trust us to listen to them. Because we haven't. Right? And we have a record of like, I don't have time for you. I'll go sit down with my child, my spouse, my friend, and I'll listen. And I'll have compassion and grace and be like, yeah, of course you'd feel this way. Look at what you went through. But with ourselves, we're like, get over it. Yeah. Like, what's wrong with you? And stop trying to talk to me. I got things to do today, right? As if our best friend called us crying and was like, I need someone to talk to. I'd be like, okay. And we wouldn't be impatient with them. So part of why our systems don't trust us is because we also have not built that trust of even just being willing to listen, right? So as you do that more and you seek to understand versus seek to judge and shame and suppress and whatever else, our subconscious starts to trust us, starts to speak more in a way that allows us to actually process. And so that's really the greatest foundation of trust. And then the other piece of like while we're in the journey of that is finding those moments of quietness, right? If like creating, because with our phones and with our busy lives, we're never quiet. We don't ever have to be. So going on a short walk with no headphones, not listening to a podcast, although they're great. Obviously, we're here. But, you know, those moments of quiet, you know, of just being with yourself and letting your brain calm, you know, and whether that is also yoga or stretching or just sitting out in nature, which is really important for our nervous systems to expand vision versus it's so narrow on our phones. You know, to just focusing on breathing for 5 minutes, right? Longer exhales. Put your legs up on the wall in that L shape for 5 minutes. That activates the parasympathetic nervous system, but just is like honoring your need to rest, right? So also finding those pockets. I kid you not, but I told my husband, because we were talking about this, I'm like, just stop taking your phone to the bathroom. Okay? Like,
Oh my God.
just stop. Yes.
That works.
But listen. Okay?
I'm like, that works.
We all do it. We all do it. We know it.
Yeah.
Okay?
100%.
Well,
It's my
we all do
office.
it. In fact, one morning, I have to share this, and I'll go back to that. I got answering emails, you know, and then before you know it, my whole right leg was so numb.
No.
And it was like 5 a.m, and I'm in my bathroom, like trying, and I'm like, this is so stupid. Like my whole leg was just numb because I'd been sitting on the toilet for so long, like, you know, doing
That's
emails.
hilarious.
But I told my husband, and I've told this to clients, even if you start doing that, right, depending on how much time you spend there, I have a small bladder, so it's a lot, that's quiet for your brain. That accumulates. Or just when you're at a stoplight, try to just be at the stoplight instead of immediately here. Like, find those moments of rest for your brain, because one reason we also can't heal and process is our brain is exhausted.
Stimulated.
We are more stimulated than ever before. Like even when I was growing up, right? We didn't have phones. Like you were bored unless you played a game or you read or you were allowed to watch a TV or movie, right? But we didn't have something to constantly stimulate, which is why all of our mental health and physical health is also worse, because our brain is constantly switching tasks, and it asks a lot of it. Like we're studying them, we're checking our phone, we're doing this, we're checking our phone. And our brain is literally exhausted to where I think it also doesn't have the reserves to do the deeper work. So doing the deeper work, like I just talked about, but also starting to give your brain just moments to reboot and don't do anything other than the task of driving, but you're not asking it to consume and integrate information.
Man, I grew up with Reader's Digest books in the bathroom.
Yeah, right?
And sometimes we just sit there and read.
Good housekeeping.
There was like
Yeah.
humor, like section, and anyway.
And then you start reading the shampoo bottle or something. You're constantly
I know, it's different.
But
It's
like,
great.
your business was there, but you're still reading. You're like, I get to the back of this magazine.
This lady, I was at the airport bathroom yesterday, and she dropped her phone right on the, and that was another like, like a public restroom, airport bathroom. But I was like, she had her phone. Even at the airport, right? Because it's just such a pull that
So that's a natural
we've
thing.
been conditioned
My
to
youngest son and my boys are not allowed to bring their iPads into the bathroom, but Noah will sneak it in there. And he's the kind of kid that like eats and poops right away. So I know when it's his time. And he's been in there for a little bit longer than usual. I'm like, Noah, are you in there with your iPad? Yes, Mama. He just sits there.
Yeah.
And he just stares at this thing, watching these stupid YouTubes. But I get it. We're overstimulated.
My daughter actually got my husband and she did it with her own money. She ordered it with my mom, so I didn't even know what it was. And it was a toilet timer.
Okay.
For my husband to take in, and it starts tracking the time, and it's so funny because
Time's up.
because she knows, right?
Poop or get off the pot.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Did you have a question?
I do,
Yes.
actually. Just understanding how you work with your clients and what you do, are you, like, what are your thoughts on evidence-based treatments like EMDR, somatic experiences? Like, is that part of kind of what you are also encompassing in your practice and what you do with your clients? Or even just your thoughts on that? Just,
Sure.
Yeah, I would love to know.
I don't really have anything negative to say about any modality. It's all person specific. It's all, depending on even personality lends itself. Beliefs even lends themselves, right? If someone's a lot more scientific, they're not so open to somatic type therapies, right? And that's not going to be quite as effective for them because they have walls of resistance around it. So with anything like that, I think it always comes to the person. It comes to even the practitioner or therapist, right? So I did EMDR. Most of my clients have done EMDR. Clients who haven't, or people I know who've done MDR did great. Most of my clients, it wasn't enough. And I'll tell you my thoughts on that, again, depending on the person, is you're still going and it's someone else telling your nervous system what to let go of. And depending how safe that feels, right? It's not enough. So what I do with my clients, they do with their brain nerve system, and it's a progressive process that builds that trust and that capacity to let go that I have found allows their system to feel like I'm choosing this. The other piece, and again, not saying that's not helpful. My MDR therapist was awesome. It just wasn't enough because this is the other missing piece. It wasn't a process. And that's where I really realized for the brain nerve system to truly change itself is a process. What's step one? What's step two? What do I do in my life? Because I can come here for this hour and it feels good, but I go back and my nervous system reverts back to what it does. I go back to my home and my nervous system, I'm home, this is what I do. I'm across from my husband, this is what I do, right? So being able to know what to do to change your nervous system while still living your life is the very other most important. And that's what I feel is missing with certain therapies, even somatic. It's great when you're there, but you're not giving me a plan of what I do in my life at home when I'm triggered, how I start to change these things. So that's where I think all modalities are great, but to change the brain long term, again, not everybody, but people depending on their life, it requires a process like anything else to start to partner with your system for it to really start to let go and feel safe and then you have to be the creator to create something new. If you don't, and that's the other piece, like you have to, and that takes consistency and practice. So the brain does not have a one trial learning for positivity. It's consistency and repetition. So if I'm not doing this other piece on myself and consciously reprogramming and finding evidence and taking action in alignment with it, even the most powerful somatic therapy, the most powerful EMDR, it's not going to be enough long term. Like you might be a lot better, but you might not feel free. So like I said, I have nothing negative to say, but for myself and the complexities of what I'd gone through and my clients, we needed a process. Plus, it's very empowering to know what to do yourself. I think all of us to a certain degree, we're always looking for help. And again, I give help, so I'm not downplaying that. But what I mean is there's still this sense of powerlessness. Like, I don't have this within me. Someone needs to fix me. And so it's really empowering for my clients to now have all the knowledge and tools within themselves. And although, like, I show them the process and coach them through it, they do it. So they change their life, and now they know how to not just maintain it, but continue it. And I think that's very, very important because for so much of my life, it was this sense of helplessness of finding the next person to help me. And now I feel so empowered. It doesn't mean I don't still seek help because I don't know everything, and I seek help when needed. And obviously I have chiropractors and practitioners and acupuncturists and all these other things that are skills I don't have, but there's not a sense of panic of reliance. Like I know the greatest power that I have is in here first. And that makes me calm because I have that sense of trust and safety with myself no matter what might come.
Yep.
Thank you.
Amen. Any other questions? Yeah, Amy.
Question. So what would you say? So for me specifically, I went through a traumatic situation that I actually don't remember. So I was, it was a pregnancy. I ended up, they knocked me out, like essentially, because I was losing so much blood, gave me a full body blood transfusion, lost the baby, unfortunately, like a full, stillborn she was. And so what's interesting is for me, I don't remember any of it. I know the day it happened. I know my life after, but inside of a human, right? We're talking about the brain, but also the trauma that lives in your cells, right? And the muscles and everything. So I didn't know the way to go. I just knew darkness, right? Complete darkness. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I had our oldest son at the time. That was kind of the, the will to move forward, right? To have that joy. But when you're in that, I just found talking, and it was at first to my mom. I couldn't talk to anyone else, but she would just listen and I would just speak. And I, at times, don't even remember what I said. And then it was going for walks. And we just built slowly on it. And then it was acupuncture. And for me, what it was, and I went consistently. You were talking about the writing. I went consistently. I found somebody that worked for me, because actually my very first person, I felt anxious and uncomfortable, and it wasn't the right person for me. And so I went to acupuncture and I got massages, but I couldn't be touched in most of my body because there was so much trauma. But what's interesting is most people talk about what you remember and unwiring the part of your brain from a traumatic situation or traumatic years or childhood. But there's also that piece of something you don't remember, but it's in your cells. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's, the beautiful thing is that in order to heal, we don't have to remember, right? Because like you said, our body already does, right? Our body and cells have that cellular memory. And so even the sense of what you did is you worked with your system. You didn't try to overhaul it, right? So you did a progressive process, right? In your own way of starting to just talk, right? To someone you trusted and felt safe with. So your nervous system was like, okay, I can talk about this with my mom, right? And you honored that, which is fantastic. And then you moved, and walking is one of the best ways to process. If we allow ourselves, like if we don't just hear stuff, walking, go walk, be with nature, you'll start to feel things, right? And cry, and you'll start to process, because the reason why is walking is the foundational movement of a human. So it's safety, right? It wasn't safe for me for 5 years because I couldn't walk, but for most, it is now. But walking is processing, because our brain comes online, and it's our most safe fundamental movement, right? And then you found a practitioner that could work with your body, right? That allowed it to feel safe to start to offload some of that trauma. So in that case, right, we don't have to go back and recall and know all the details, but even the writing can be effective in the aftermath of what you went through, right? Because even when we're under anesthesia, our subconscious mind is still operating, right? Because we're not dead. So it's still operating, which is why it's so important for people to go into surgeries without fear, right? I talk about it all the time, because your subconscious is ruminating over that while you're asleep. But what you did and what you can continue to do is you're acknowledging it, and you're allowing your body space and time to start to move through it, right? And when you do that and you did it consistently enough because you were aware of it, then the brain and body were designed to heal, and they want to. It's just that their attempts to try to get us to do that usually come in the form of stress responses. So we don't see that as communication of, hey, we need to move through this. We now see it as communication of being further damaged, further broken. What's wrong with me? Go away. I don't have time for you. And then that just solidifies that whole stress response, and we keep moving forward until sometimes it gets so loud, But
Breaking point.
And I'm sorry you went through that.
Yeah, no, it's what's interesting is life is life, and it is it's part of my life. It's a story, right? So to be able to know, I think most importantly, how to have people heal from something like that, because you could stay dark forever.
Absolutely. And not just because of you. And that's where I really try to differentiate. It's not just you, it's your brain. Because then we start thinking, what's wrong with me? People go through worse. Why can't I move on? Now I'm just so broken. I'll never be the same. And it's that honoring of time and space and allowance with compassion and grace that allow the healing to happen, right? Like that's why I always say we get like self-love wrong. It's not about loving the best parts of us. It's about loving the most broken, hurt, ugly, right, parts of us that have been impacted by life, and it's honoring them while moving through them.
It's like that exercise where they say if you can go back to like that 12-year-old version of yourself, because you're going back to that 12-year-old that was going through something, or that 18-year-old that was going through something. You're not going back to the moment that was like the proudest moment of that 18-year-old version of you. It's a tough time.
Yeah.
They exist, and it's what makes you you.
Yeah. And it's crazy because we do like acknowledge how other people have been impacted, but when it comes to ourselves, we're more like, we must be a robot and not be impacted by life. How dare you have feelings?
Well, I don't cry that often. And my husband, you can like cue his tears in a movie or something, and he'll cry watching, I don't know, some sort of TikTok. And I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to cry now too. And I'm like, it doesn't work. It doesn't come out like that. But there's parts of me, and maybe you guys all experience this too, where you're like, I really want to cry. Like, I know I need this right now.
I need a cry.
I cry.
I need a cry.
Yes.
Yes. And it's so damn liberating.
Well, it is.
Oh yeah. It's
a form
part
of
of healing.
therapy,
Yeah.
right?
It's biologically wired in to help healing. And with that being said, because certainly that's one thing of like, I want to cry, but I won't allow it, or I can't. But also, like I tell my clients, we're also different. Like, so just because someone cries a lot doesn't mean that you're supposed to that degree, right? Because we are different. So it is one thing if you haven't allowed yourself, or there's protective walls that are keeping, and that's important to look at and start to break down those walls so that you feel open enough, because crying is vulnerable, right? And we're all have different personalities, to which some of us show that in more tears than someone else. And it doesn't mean you're not feeling, you're not processing if you don't cry to the same degree as someone else, right? Like, because personality also does come into play.
Yeah.
Right? So we all should be able to cry when we want to, and we need to explore that if we feel like we hold that off. And you're never going to cry as someone else who just, that's more how they process.
Yeah.
Right?
And my sister-in-law cries when she sees somebody else crying.
See?
She's a crier.
This is
And she cries for me. Like,
I cry. I'm a crier too. It's fine. It's fine. Like my daughter just looked at me because we went to a play, and the performers were so good. I was crying, and she's like, "Mom, do you miss dancing?"
Aw.
And I'm like, "No, I'm so moved by their talent." And obviously I know the journey to get to that place. And so I'll cry. I'll watch like a great performance on like American Idol, or I'll start crying because I'm so happy. Or even Shark Tank. Like when someone gets a deal, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy for them. So see, my husband next to me, and he will cry too, but he could be just as happy, but not crying. And that's where I think it's important to, it doesn't always mean one of us cares more, is more open. We just all are different, and that comes to crying as well.
It's funny because I was emotional, and then when my dad passed, I could not cry because I had to hold it together for everyone. And then if I started to, my mom would be like, no, don't cry. So then it was like, okay, don't cry. So it took almost a year and work with my therapist, even when she said, Bella, this is a safe space. It's okay, because she would see me get emotional. She's like, let it go, let it. Instantly, it would shut that walls would come up. I'm like, don't tell me what to do. I ain't crying. Because I'm not
too
crying
vulnerable.
today. Yeah, because I thought if I started crying, I would never stop.
Yeah.
Because I was not allowed. So it took almost a year for me to like
same.
say, like
Growing up is the same thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, okay, you skinned your knee and you have 2 minutes to cry and then you're done. Wrap it up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of like,
See, and
time.
that created meaning, and it's kind of in the same way. Like I'll tell my clients, they're like, "Why am I so angry all of a sudden?" I'm like, "Good, good. That means you're healing, right?" Because for me, I didn't allow myself to feel any anger towards life, towards God, because it was like and it served me, okay? And I'm grateful, and I probably wouldn't have survived without these mechanisms of like, I'm going to be the champion, I'm going to fight through this, I'm going to defy the odds, I'm going to live. The byproduct of that was I didn't let myself feel sad. I would not let myself, because I'm like, I have to put this energy towards healing. So I had to deal with that later in life because it was still there. But also because I'm like, I'm just going to trust in life. I'm going to trust in God. Like, anger is not the emotion. And then so when I went through my healing with my chronic pain, which was also healing a lot of my illness as a teenager, I was like suddenly angry. And it wasn't anything in particular. It was just angry at everything I'd gone through, everything life had taken from me, all the just unfairness, because I'm not a victim mentality, but you still can't look at life and be like, that was hard. And like, you went through it twice. And I knew I was at a new layer of healing when I allowed anger. And not at anyone. I wasn't taking it out on anyone. I was just allowing myself to feel it and express it safely in my car, right? My car was my place, my little sanctuary. I'm like, people think I'm listening to rock music or really yelling at someone on the phone, you know? But that's where, for me, for someone else, it could be tears, right? For me, that was the emotion, a big one. I had shut down. I had judged. I had suppressed. You're not allowed to be angry, right? And so when I finally just allowed that, it's like, oh, I'm healing, right? So I'm always, because I see that especially with women, because anger is not a good emotion. When they're like, why am I so mad? I'm like, awesome. Let it out. Not at people, but let it out, right?
I'm sure Dilworth knows the screaming lady on the mountain. Like,
I
because
don't.
my anger came first, and then
the grief.
The grief.
Well, anger usually is a mask for grief.
Yeah.
The anger is there, but it's almost an easier emotion because there's cortisol attached to it, right? Anger is also why we don't give up, right? So it also motivates us to keep going. So that's part of the fight or flight mechanisms, right? And it's a good emotion, or we wouldn't end wars and people wouldn't be able to go into burning buildings. And so usually anger is before the real sorrow and grief sits in, right? And that's why you have to also allow anger before the grief will really come, and then you can let it go. Yeah.
Okay, well, you might be angry about this. But I got one last question.
That's okay.
One last question for you. What do you think defines a wild woman?
I think a wild woman is a flexible woman. And here's what I mean by that. The most important thing we're looking to have in our nervous system is flexibility. I think the disservice we talk about today is like you're always supposed to be regulated, right? Regulated. And that's like impossible because life is life, right? If your kid's going out in the street and a car's coming, you're not going to be like, Sophia, right? There's a car coming. You're going to be activated and you're going to do what you need to do to get their attention. Life is going to activate you. You're going to go through things. People are going to hurt you. You're going to have to overcome and like believe in yourself. And I can do this and I'm strong enough. And I think a wild woman is one which can rise and honor rest and repair and heal. Like that's the woman that life doesn't change. That's the woman that rises above, but also can just as much fight as she can sit and honor her grief. Like to me, that's what is a wild woman. And I was a fighter my whole life and I'm grateful, or I wouldn't be alive today. I wouldn't be walking today. I wouldn't have created bioemotional healing. But the harder journey for me was to become that part of me that could honor myself and my journey and rest and equally understand that both parts of me are just as honorable and just as important. And that's where I feel like then I stepped into my greatest power as a wild woman.
There you are. Thanks for joining us again, Ashleigh.
Thanks for having me.
Coming to Kelowna just for this.
Well, we're going to go to Mexico. I'm ready for a trip now, right?
There we go. Open those curtains. It's probably snowing out.
Margaritas in our turtlenecks and clearly not in Mexico.
Mexico
Bathing
weather.
suits are under here.
I love it. Okay, this is
That was
awesome.
wonderful.
Yeah.